Yes, ma'am.
One is when you're like talking to someone that was there, and the other is like talking to someone that's seen like in the newspaper or something.
That's exactly right. Which is which?
Secondary is the second side, the first one is the first one.
You're exactly right. Can you think of any primary sources that you saw or heard at the downtown public library last week?
Remember the video interviews?
Yes. Why was that primary?
Because they experienced it.
Those people experienced immigration firsthand. Exactly. What's another thing we saw that was primary source? Yeah, when you were looking at the microfilm. And what were those a primary source for? What event or what?
I don't know, there's a lot of things.
Well, I think she had pulled articles from the civil rights movement time, right, in the 60s? So it was the primary source for that. What about in the civil rights room? Did we see any primary sources there? Yeah, the pictures were. What about Mr. Broadway's talk that he gave? Was that a primary source?
No, because he wasn't there.
Because he wasn't there. So even though we learned a lot from him, that was the secondary source. So the primary document that we're going to look at today is probably the second most famous thing that Martin Luther King Jr. ever wrote. What would be the most famous? The I Have a Dream speech. And this one is called The Letter from Birmingham Jail. And he wrote it about 3 months before the I Have a Dream speech. And it is just brilliant, but it's kind of been eclipsed by the I Have a Dream speech because that got so much attention that people don't remember the Birmingham Jail letter quite as well. This was in 1963. So the pictures that we saw of the Nashville lunch counter sit-ins, those happened in 1960. So this is about 3 years later. It's the same kind of thing going on in Birmingham with sit-ins and demonstrations and boycotts of the downtown businesses, but there was one big difference. You remember Mr. Broadway talked about in Nashville, mostly things stayed pretty nonviolent. There were a few exceptions to that, but mostly it stayed pretty nonviolent. In Birmingham, that was not true. The people who were doing the marching got attacked by police dogs, they got sprayed with fire hoses, they got attacked in many other ways, and so it really was to a higher, more, just a more violent level in Birmingham. So during this time of protest in the spring of 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. gets arrested in Birmingham because of the demonstrations that he is doing and helping to organize. And while he's in jail, 8 white clergymen in Birmingham published this newspaper, open letter in the newspaper, and basically they're saying, you know, there's a way that we get things done in the United States to change things, and that's through the courts, or change laws. And that's the way segregation needs to change, not through these demonstrations that are getting so violent. And so they published this letter in the newspaper. Let's back up a minute. What's a clergyman? It's kind of a fancy word. Yes. No, not a KKK member. Good guess. Nobody? A preacher.
I didn't know.
It's just, it's okay. It's a fancy word for a preacher. So it's 8 leaders in the white church that have published this letter. And one of the accusations they make in this letter is that outsiders, sound like a familiar word, outsiders are coming into Birmingham and stirring up trouble. And even though they didn't name names in the letter, who do you think was the main outsider they were talking about? Martin Luther King Jr. was the main one they were talking about. So he sees this newspaper article while he's in jail, and he writes his answer to it, which becomes Letter from Birmingham Jail. And we're only going to read the first little bit. It's pretty long. And in the first part, he gives 3 really good arguments that say, no, I'm not an outsider in Birmingham. I deserve to be here. I have a purpose and a right to be here. So we're going to listen to that first part of Letter from Birmingham Jail, and I want us to think about the 3 arguments that he uses. Try to pick out the 3 different ways that he justifies his being in Birmingham. So go ahead and get on your email. I've sent you a document that has the text that we're going to listen to. So this video, this is not really Martin Luther King Jr. This is an actor's reenactment of him being in jail and writing this letter. So don't let that throw you. This guy's not really Martin Luther King Jr. It's just kind of a dramatization.
My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all the criticisms that cross my desk, My secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill, and that your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I think I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the view which argues against outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every southern state with headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. We have some 85 affiliated organizations across the South, and one of them is the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. Frequently, we share staff, educational, and financial resources with our affiliates. Several months ago, the affiliate here in Birmingham asked us to be on call to engage in a nonviolent direct action program if such were deemed necessary. We readily consented, and when the hour came, we lived up to our promise. So I, along with several members of my staff, am here because I was invited here. I am here because I have organizational ties here. But more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometown. And just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds.
Okay, so that first paragraph, when he's talking about how he gets criticized all the time, he can't answer everybody's criticisms, what would you call that paragraph in his letter or his essay? Does he jump right into an argument? What's the first part of an essay usually? That's his introduction, right? He says, I know that you're putting forth these arguments in a spirit of honesty and goodwill, so I'm going to answer you. And then he jumps in and starts talking about why he's not an outsider. So what I want us to do is take the second paragraph, the third paragraph, and the fourth paragraph and figure out what is his argument in each of those paragraphs that he's not an outsider. So you guys at this table, and girls, maybe if you'll move down here so you can all talk, I want you to look at that second paragraph and find the thesis statement. Find the sentence that sums up his first reason that he's not an outsider. This table, I want you to take the third paragraph. It starts with, but more basically, find the thesis statement in that paragraph. And you guys take the last one, okay? Figure out what his thesis statement is. What's his main argument? You can talk.
So we're